I woke up to the sound of rain, soft and relentless against glass, the kind of rain that sounds like a whisper you can't quite understand, as if the world is trying to tell you something, but you're too broken to listen. My head throbbed, dull and heavy, and when I tried to move, a sharp pain bloomed behind my eyes, like something inside me had been torn out and hastily stitched back together. I blinked, once, twice, and the room came into view. Too bright, too clean, too foreign. A hospital, I thought. Sterile white walls, the faint hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic laced with something faintly metallic, like blood that had been washed away but never really gone. Then I saw him. He stood by the window, a silhouette carved from darkness itself, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that looked too severe for a place like this. His hair was slicked back, though a few rebellious strands fell over his forehead. And when he finally turned to face me, his eyes, God, his eyes, were the kind of dark that didn't just hold shadows, but made them. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, deep and rough around the edges. The kind of voice that could slice through silence like a blade but still managed to sound like a promise. My throat felt dry, the words clawing their way out. "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked closer, slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the stillness. And when he stopped beside my bed, I could see the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a small imperfection that somehow made him even more dangerous, more real. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they've lost, disbelief tangled with pain, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "You don't remember me," he murmured, and I heard the faint crack in his voice, the sound of a man trying to swallow something that was too bitter to keep down. "It's Dante Morelli." The name meant nothing. I tried to reach into the fog of my mind, searching for something, anything, a memory, a face, a feeling. But all I found was emptiness, a vast, echoing void where my past should have been. I started, shaking my head. "I don't know you." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought I saw the flicker of something almost human. Hurt, maybe, or anger carefully disguised as indifference. "You're safe now," he said instead. "That's all that matters." Safe. The word tasted wrong. There was something in his tone, not quite affection, not quite control, but something that lived in the gray space between the two, something dangerous. "Where am I?" I asked, the question barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, just watched me, his gaze heavy and unrelenting. Then finally he said, "You're home." Home. The lie hit harder than the pain in my skull. I didn't know where home was, but I knew it wasn't this. Still, I didn't argue. There was something in the way he said it, final, absolute, that made me think defiance wasn't an option. He turned toward the door, his back to me. "You need rest. I'll have someone bring you food." "Wait," I said quickly, the word slipping out before I could stop it. "Why are you helping me?" He stopped, his hand on the doorknob but didn't turn around. "Because," he said softly, almost too softly, "you were mine once." And then he was gone, leaving the room colder, emptier, as if the air itself followed him out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, fire, the scream of tires, a sharp explosion of light, and then darkness again. My body remembered something my mind didn't. My heart beat too fast, as if trying to outrun a memory. When morning came, Dante was there again, sitting in the corner of the room with a cup of coffee, as if he'd never left. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his gaze unreadable, his presence filling the space like a shadow that refused to move. I studied him, trying to find clues in the lines of his face. He looked like someone used to power, used to people obeying without question. There was something cold in him, but underneath that coldness I sensed something raw. Grief, maybe, or guilt. "What happened to me?" I asked finally, my voice shaking. His eyes flicked to mine, dark and steady. "There was an accident," he said. "You almost died." The words felt rehearsed, controlled. I waited for more, but he offered nothing. "Who am I?" I pressed. He hesitated, just a second, but I caught it. "Elena," he said. "Elena Rossi." The name rolled off his tongue like something sacred, but when I repeated it under my breath, it didn't fit. It was like trying on a dress that belonged to someone else, familiar in shape, but wrong in every detail. I looked at him. "You're sure?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'd never forget your name." But there was something in his eyes, a flicker, brief but undeniable, that said maybe he already had. He took me home that evening, or what he called home. The mansion loomed over the hillside like a beast carved from stone, all marble, glass, and silence. The guards at the gates bowed when he passed. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and old secrets. The walls were lined with portraits, all of them too beautiful, too tragic, as if every face had a story that ended in fire. He showed me to a room, large, luxurious, and lonely. The bed was covered in silk sheets, the kind of softness that feels like a trap. On the dresser sat a silver-framed photo, me, or someone who looked exactly like me, smiling in a white dress, standing beside Dante, whose expression was softer than I'd ever seen it. I picked up the photo, my hands trembling. "Who is she?" He stood in the doorway, watching me. "You," he said. Before. The word hung between us, heavy with everything unspoken. I turned to face him, the photograph still in my hand. "Why do I feel like I don't belong here?" He stepped closer, his gaze dark and consuming. "Because you forgot," he said quietly. But I never did. His hand brushed against my cheek, gentle and deliberate, and for one insane moment I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside this stranger's eyes lived a truth I'd lost. But beneath that gentleness, there was something else. Possession, desperation, something that made my pulse race not from affection, but from instinct. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the man who looked at me like I was both salvation and sin. Every sound in the house, the creak of wood, the distant echo of footsteps, the low hum of security cameras, felt like part of something bigger, a web I'd been caught in long before I woke up in that hospital. And as the rain began again, tapping softly against the windows, a thought slid into my mind like a whisper in the dark. Maybe the reason I didn't remember my past was because he didn't want me to. But tomorrow, I would find out. Tomorrow, I'd start searching for the truth hiding in the mansion of secrets. Morning in Dante Morelli's house didn't arrive softly. It crept in like an intruder, filtered through curtains of silk and dust, painting gold over the walls that gleamed too perfectly, like a museum built to preserve something that was long dead. I woke to the faint murmur of voices outside my door. Male, hushed, reverent, and tinged with fear. The kind of fear that doesn't come from respect, but from survival. When I sat up, the room felt too still, as if it were listening. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, freshly cut and placed in a crystal vase by my bedside. Petals scattered like blood drops on white linen. Someone had been here while I slept. I moved slowly, testing my legs, the cold marble floor biting against my bare feet. And every step echoed, too loud, too human in a house that seemed to despise noise. The walls were tall and bare except for a few oil paintings that hung like silent witnesses. Portraits of stern-faced men and sorrowful women dressed in centuries-old elegance. their painted eyes following me with quiet judgment. The corridors stretched endlessly, and I couldn't help but think that if I got lost here, no one would find me unless he allowed it. When I finally opened the door, the hallway greeted me with that same suffocating luxury. Chandeliers that sparkled like trapped stars, heavy curtains that swallowed sunlight, and the faint aroma of cigar smoke lingering like the ghost of last night's sin. I followed the sound of voices until they faded, leading me to a balcony that overlooked the grand foyer. Below, men in suits moved like shadows, speaking in low tones, their movements efficient, military dangerous. They looked up when they sensed me, their gazes flicking away instantly, as though looking too long might cost them something. And then I saw him. Dante stood at the base of the marble staircase, his back turned to me, speaking to one of his men in that deep, deliberate tone that filled the space like gravity. His presence commanded the air around him, pulling it taut. Every word he spoke weighted with something that felt both holy and deadly. I watched him for a long moment, feeling that strange ache in my chest. The one I couldn't explain, the one that whispered that I knew him, that I'd loved him, that I'd hated him, all at once. And when he turned, his eyes found me instantly, as though he'd known exactly where I was all along. "You shouldn't wander," he said, his voice carrying across the marble with effortless authority. "Not yet." "I couldn't sleep," I murmured, my hand resting on the railing, the cool iron grounding me. I needed to move. His eyes softened, just slightly, though it felt like watching ice shift before it cracks. "You're safe here," he said again, that word he used too easily, too often, as if saying it enough times might make it true. "But safety has rules." I wanted to ask what kind of safety required guards with guns and eyes that never stopped scanning, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't ready to provoke him. Not yet. Later, he took me on what he called a tour, though it felt more like a controlled performance. Every room was immaculate, filled with expensive furniture that looked untouched, art pieces that didn't quite match the space, and shelves of books that no one seemed to read. The house was enormous, but it didn't feel alive. It felt curated, like every object had been placed there to distract from something missing. "This was your favorite room," he said when we entered the library. A vast chamber lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, ladders that reached into shadow, and the faint scent of old paper and whiskey. I trailed my fingers along the spines of the books, tracing titles that felt familiar but hollow. "Was it?" I asked softly. He smiled, faint and tragic. "You used to sit right there," he said, gesturing to a leather chair by the window, reading for hours. "You'd look up sometimes, glare at me for interrupting." The way he said it, so intimate, so detailed, made my heart ache with something I didn't understand. I looked at the chair, half expecting a ghost to be sitting there, waiting for me to remember. "And now?" I asked. His eyes lingered on me, unreadable. "Now you're just trying to remember why." Something in his tone made me shiver. After he left, I stayed there for hours, drawn by a restless energy that wouldn't let me be still. The books whispered softly when I touched them, their pages brittle, their words fading. And that's when I saw it. A thin seam along the back wall, nearly invisible in the dim light, a faint line that didn't belong. I pressed against it, and a hidden panel gave way with a quiet sigh. Behind it, a narrow passage yawned open, dark and secret. The air inside was colder, older. The walls were rough stone, damp to the touch. I followed the narrow path, the light from the library fading behind me. And when I reached the end, I found a small room lit only by a single lamp, its glow flickering over a desk covered in photographs. My breath caught. Every photograph was of me, or rather, of her. Different angles, different places, some where she was smiling, others where she wasn't aware of being watched. In one, she was laughing by the seaside, hair wind-tossed, sunlight catching her eyes. In another, she was standing beside Dante, his arm possessively around her waist, their smiles brittle and beautiful. My fingers trembled as I picked one up, me in a white dress looking over my shoulder, and on the back, scrawled in black ink, my angel, my curse. I stumbled back, the room spinning. Who was she? Who was I? Behind me I heard the faintest sound, the soft click of a shoe against stone. And when I turned, Dante was there. His expression was calm, too calm, but his eyes, they burned. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, and though his tone was even, there was something dangerous coiled beneath it, something that made my pulse thunder. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Why do you have these pictures? Why are you—" He cut me off with a step forward, closing the distance between us in a heartbeat. "Because you're mine," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You've always been mine." I tried to move back, but the wall stopped me. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic in a way that made fear and desire blur together until I couldn't tell which one was louder. "You're lying," I whispered. "You knew her. Whoever she was, but I'm not her." His gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes, and when he spoke, it was barely a whisper. "Then tell me why you smell like her. Why you dream the same dreams she did. Why your heartbeat sounds exactly like hers." I couldn't breathe. He reached up, his fingers brushing the side of my face, rough and tender all at once, and for a moment I saw something break in his expression. A flicker of grief so real it made my chest tighten. "They told me you were gone," he said. "I buried you. I mourned you. But you came back." "I'm not her," I said again, but even to me, the words sounded fragile, unconvincing. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin. "Then why?" he murmured. "Do you look at me like you remember every promise I ever broke?" He left me there, his words sinking deep, twisting like a knife I couldn't pull out. When I finally forced myself to move, I looked once more at the photographs, at the handwriting that curved, across the backs of them, the same handwriting I'd seen on a letter tucked inside one of the books in the library, signed Arya, not Elena. Arya. And in that moment I knew the man who claimed to protect me was hiding a truth far darker than I was ready to face. Because if I wasn't Elena Rossi, if I was Arya Bellini, then the woman he thought had died wasn't a ghost at all. She was me. When I woke the next morning, the world felt heavier, as if the night itself had wrapped its arms around me and refused to let go. The first light of dawn spilled across the bedroom in thin, hesitant ribbons, painting soft gold over the edges of the curtains. But nothing about the room felt warm or gentle. It felt like a stage, and I was waking in the middle of someone else's tragedy, forced to perform lines I didn't remember learning. I sat up slowly, the silk sheets rustling against my skin, and for a moment I simply stared at my hands, tracing the faint marks along my wrists as though my body might tell me the story my mind refused to reveal. There was a small scar near the base of my thumb, curved and pale, and when I ran my finger over it, an image flashed behind my eyes. A man's hand gripping mine, the metallic scent of blood, a whisper that sounded like a vow. Then it was gone, leaving only that hollow ache of almost remembering. When I stepped into the hall, the house was alive in a way it hadn't been the day before. Voices echoed faintly from somewhere below. The low hum of men speaking in tones too measured to be casual. Footsteps moving with precision. The faint jingle of keys or weapons. I couldn't tell which. I followed the sound down the winding staircase, my hand gliding along the polished railing, until I reached the grand foyer, where sunlight caught on the marble floor, reflecting like shattered glass. Dante stood at the center of it all, surrounded by his men, silent, obedient shadows dressed in black, his presence commanding every inch of the space. He was speaking to one of them, his voice low, sharp, the kind that didn't rise when it demanded attention because it never had to. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments. Shipment, betrayal, clean it up. The language of power disguised as necessity. When he saw me, his words stopped mid-sentence, his attention cutting toward me with the weight of something that burned. The men fell silent instantly, their gazes lowering, and the air seemed to shift, like the house itself exhaled in unease. "You should be resting," he said, his tone softer than his eyes. I wanted to ask a dozen questions, about the photographs, the name Aria, the secret passage, the memories that bled into my dreams. But something in the way the others looked at him, with reverence and fear tangled so tightly they were indistinguishable, made me pause. Whatever this place was, Dante was its sun and its storm, and everyone here revolved around his will. "I couldn't sleep," I said quietly, my voice betraying more than I wanted it to. "The silence keeps me awake." A small smile curved his lips, humorless and fleeting. "This house doesn't know silence," he said. "It only pretends to." He dismissed his men with a wave of his hand, and they vanished through the side corridors like mist dispersing under command. When we were alone, he walked toward me, each step deliberate, the kind of slow movement that carried more danger than speed ever could. He stopped only a breath away, close enough for me to smell his cologne. Dark, spiced, with something faintly metallic beneath it, like smoke or gunpowder. "I heard you were exploring," he said. I met his gaze, steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I found a room," I said, "with pictures of me." His jaw tightened, a barely visible motion but enough to make my stomach drop. "You shouldn't have gone there." "Why not?" I asked, my voice low, defiant in a way that surprised even me. "If I'm really who you say I am, shouldn't I know what that means?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver lighter, flicking it open, letting the flame burn between us. "Because knowing," he said, his tone quiet but unyielding, "comes with a price." He snapped the lighter shut, the sound echoing like a punctuation mark. I wanted to demand the truth, to force him to say the name I'd found carved behind my mind like a secret prayer, Aria Bellini. But before I could speak, the front doors burst open. The sound that followed was chaos. The sharp crack of gunfire, the shattering of glass, the metallic scream of bullets tearing through marble. Dante reacted before I could think. His arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me to the floor, his body covering mine with brutal precision. I felt the weight of him, the smell of smoke and blood flooding the air, the thunder of footsteps as his men drew their weapons and returned fire. "Stay down," he growled, his voice roughened by adrenaline. The room dissolved into noise, shouting, gunfire, the pounding rhythm of violence, and all I could do was press my face against his chest and try to breathe through the fear clawing its way up my throat. I didn't understand what was happening, only that danger had come for him, and by extension for me. When the shooting finally stopped, silence fell with the heaviness of aftermath. Dante pushed himself up, his movements sharp, efficient. Blood splattered the marble near the entrance. One of his men lay motionless, and through the broken doorway I saw the black smoke of burning cars rising against the gray morning sky. I stared, heart hammering. Who were they? He turned to me, his expression unreadable, though the muscle in his jaw twitched with suppressed fury. People who made the mistake of thinking they could take what's mine. There it was again. That word, mine. I wanted to tell him I didn't belong to anyone, but before I could speak, he crouched in front of me, his hands cupping my face, his thumb brushing the side of my neck in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "You're safe," he whispered, but the lie was too soft, too tender to believe. "I killed someone," I said suddenly, the words falling out before I could stop them. He looked at me sharply, confusion flickering in his gaze, and I realized I wasn't speaking of the present. I was remembering. The smell of gunpowder, the weight of metal in my hand, the recoil that burned my skin. It flashed so vividly that I gasped. "I've done this before." For the first time, I saw him falter. His hands dropped from my face, his voice lowering. "You remember?" "Not everything," I whispered. "Just fragments, fire, blood, and you." He stood, turning away from me, his shoulders rigid beneath his dark shirt. "You shouldn't remember," he said quietly. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because once you do," he said, his voice tightening like a fist, "you'll hate me." Later, after the bodies were cleared and the smoke had settled, Dante took me to his office. A vast, dimly lit room filled with books, liquor, and maps that weren't maps at all, but plans, operations, power disguised as paperwork. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light, and stared into it as though it might offer absolution. "I wasn't lying to you," he said finally, his voice lower now, softer. "Your name was Elena Rossi. But before that, it was Aria Bellini. You were my fiancé, and 2 years ago you died." The room seemed to tilt, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You buried me?" He nodded once. "There was nothing left to bury. The car exploded. I thought it was you. I thought I'd lost you." I shook my head, the world spinning. "But I'm here." "Yes," he said, setting the glass down, his gaze meeting mine. "And that's why I can't let you go again." Something in me cracked. Anger, disbelief, grief. I couldn't tell which. "You're saying I died, Dante, that I'm someone else. Do you even hear yourself?" He took a step closer, and though he didn't touch me, I could feel the gravity of him, the pull that both terrified and drew me in. "If you're not her," he said, his voice quiet but breaking, "then tell me why you move like her, why you breathe like her, why you look at me like you're still the reason I can't sleep." I wanted to scream, to deny him, to run. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the confusion, I felt something dark and ancient stir. A memory that didn't belong to now. A vow whispered in blood and fire. "I swore to protect you," he said, his eyes burning with something that wasn't mercy. "Even if it kills me." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, and whispered the question that had begun to haunt me since the moment I saw his face. "Who was I, Dante?" He smiled, slow, sad, dangerous. "You were the woman who ruined me." And in that moment I knew the next truth wouldn't save me. It would destroy everything. The night after Dante told me that I was dead once, sleep became a thing that existed only in theory. I could close my eyes, but I couldn't rest. Because every time I did, the darkness filled with fire and the sound of my own voice screaming his name, and I would wake drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around me like restraints I'd fought against. The air inside the mansion felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I got up before dawn, drawn by a restlessness I couldn't name, and wandered through the empty halls where moonlight pooled in corners like secrets too shy to reveal themselves. Every step I took echoed softly through the silence, and I couldn't stop thinking about his words. "You were my fiancé. You died 2 years ago." I'd said the words to myself a dozen times since then, and each time they sounded both impossible and inevitable, like something my soul already knew even if my mind couldn't yet accept it. If it was true, if I was Aria Bellini, then my life had already ended once, and everything after that was a stolen miracle or a calculated lie. When I reached the corridor that led to Dante's office, I paused outside the door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to hear the murmur of voices from inside. Dante's and another man's, low and tense, the kind of conversation that tasted like danger. I should have walked away, but curiosity has always been a crueler weapon than fear. "The girl shouldn't be here," the other man was saying. His voice carried the rough edge of someone used to violence. "You can't keep pretending she's her." "I'm not pretending," Dante replied, his tone quiet but sharp enough to cut. "I know what I see." "What you see," the man countered, "is what you want to see. Aria Bellini is dead, boss. Whoever this woman is, she's not her." There was a long pause, followed by the clink of glass. I could picture Dante then, standing by the window with a drink in his hand, staring into the night as if trying to read the truth in the stars. "You weren't there," he said finally, his voice low, dangerous in its stillness. "You didn't see her eyes when she woke. You didn't hear the way she said my name." "You mean the way she didn't say your name?" the man shot back. "She doesn't remember you, Dante, and maybe that's for the best." Something crashed. Maybe the glass, maybe something more fragile. And I flinched. Dante's voice came next, rougher, unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "You think I don't know what I'm doing? You think I haven't asked myself every day if I'm out of my mind? But she's here. She's breathing. And if there's even the smallest chance that she's really Aria, I won't lose her again." Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The kind of silence that ends arguments not because one side wins, but because the other realizes there's nothing left to say. When I heard footsteps approaching the door, I backed away quickly, hiding behind one of the marble pillars until the man stormed past me, muttering curses under his breath. I waited until his footsteps faded before slipping into the office. Dante was standing by the broken glass, his expression unreadable in the faint light. He didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from fighting ghosts. "You were listening," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "I had to," I replied, stepping further inside. "You're talking about me like I'm some kind of experiment." His gaze lifted to mine, dark and full of something that looked like regret. "You're not an experiment," he said. "You're the only thing that ever made sense." "Don't," I whispered, shaking my head. "Don't say that. Not when you don't even know who I am." He walked toward me, slow and deliberate, as though approaching something fragile but dangerous. "I do know," he said. "I've always known. Even if you don't remember me, your body does. Your eyes do. I see it every time you look at me." The air between us thickened, heavy with all the things neither of us could say. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But believing him meant accepting that my entire life, the fragments I thought I knew, the blank spaces that terrified me, might belong to someone else. "Then tell me," I said finally, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "Tell me how I died." For a long moment he didn't answer. He turned away, his hand dragging through his hair, his shoulders rising and falling with a sigh that sounded like defeat. "You want the truth?" he said at last. "It isn't something you can just hear, Aria. It's something you remember. And when you do, it'll destroy you." I moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him, close enough to see the flicker of fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear for me. "Then let it," I said. I'd rather be destroyed by the truth than protected by lies. Something broke inside him then. I saw it, felt it. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "The night you died," he said, "we were supposed to run, you and I. I'd arranged everything. A plane, new names, a new life. I was done with all of this. The blood, the violence, the power. You said you wanted out too, but someone found out. They planted a bomb in your car. I was late that night. You left before I got to you. The car exploded 2 blocks from here. I saw it happen. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, pounding so loudly it drowned everything else. And you're sure it was me? He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. There wasn't enough left to question it. They told me it was you, and I believed them. His words painted fire in my mind, red and orange and screaming, and I saw flashes. The steering wheel beneath my hands, headlights slicing through rain, the distant echo of a voice over the phone. Don't go yet, Arya. Then light, searing, devouring. I gasped and stumbled back, my knees hitting the edge of the desk. Arya, Dante said, his voice breaking. I shouldn't have told you. But I wasn't listening anymore. My head was full of noise, sirens, metal, fire, and behind it all the faintest sound of a woman's laughter, familiar and foreign at once. I looked at him, my breath trembling. What if I wasn't supposed to die? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? What if it wasn't a mistake? I whispered. What if I was the one who left early for a reason? He stared at me, and I could see the thought forming behind his eyes, dark and dangerous. You think someone set you up? I shook my head. No, Dante, I think maybe I set you up. He froze, every muscle in his body going still. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then he stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't say that, he said. Don't you dare say that. But I could see it. The truth unraveling behind his eyes, the possibility he didn't want to face. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, low and distant, like a warning. If that's true, he said finally, his voice hoarse, then everything I've built, everything I've done, was for a lie. I wanted to tell him I didn't know, that it was just a feeling, a terrible, unprovable instinct clawing its way out of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Somewhere inside me, beneath the fog of confusion and the haze of grief, a part of me remembered. The sound of a gun being cocked, the cold satisfaction of betrayal, the quiet certainty of a choice made long ago. And as he turned away, his hands trembling, his voice breaking on the words, I loved you too much to see what you were. I realized the fire that had killed me wasn't an accident. It was consequence. And now that I was alive again, the past wasn't finished burning. It was strange how silence could be louder than any scream, how it could fill every corner of a room and crawl beneath your skin until it felt like a living thing. After Dante's confession, after the truth bled into the cracks of everything I thought I knew, the house seemed to grow quieter, colder, and yet more suffocating, as though it was watching me, waiting to see what I would do now that the past had begun to stir. I spent the morning sitting by the window, staring at the endless gray sky, my reflection faint against the glass, my thoughts spiraling like smoke I couldn't grasp. Every breath I took felt too deliberate, too heavy, like I had to remind myself to stay alive when maybe I shouldn't have been at all. The memories came in fragments, slipping through my mind when I least expected them. Flashes of faces, voices, the burn of heat against my skin. There was always a man's voice, low and commanding, whispering my name like it was both a warning and a promise. Sometimes it sounded like Dante, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I thought it might have been my own voice echoing back. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fire again. Not just the explosion, but what came before it. The way I'd gripped the steering wheel. The faint tremor of guilt that had already begun in my chest before the world tore itself apart. When Dante came to me that evening, the storm had already begun outside. The rain hit the windows in wild bursts, and the sound of thunder rolled through the mansion like an ancient drumbeat. He stood in the doorway, framed by the dim light of the hall, his shirt undone at the collar, his hair damp as though he'd been standing out in the rain himself, letting it punish him for sins he couldn't wash away. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than anger, softer than grief, and yet filled with both. "You haven't eaten," he said finally, his voice rough, a little hoarse. "I couldn't," I replied, my eyes still on the window. "It feels like food would turn to ash in my mouth." He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room and stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. He smelled of rain and whiskey and something darker beneath it, regret, maybe, or restraint. When I turned to face him, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, bottomless eyes, looked at me like he was staring into a past he couldn't bear to let go of. "Do you hate me now?" he asked quietly, as if the question itself had been haunting him. "I don't know," I said, and that was the most honest thing I could give him. "I don't even know who I am. How could I hate you when I don't even remember why I should?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Maybe you shouldn't remember," he said. "Maybe it's better this way." "And live as who? Elena Rossi? The woman you built from a corpse?" His expression shifted, pained, but there was defiance there too. That stubborn, ruthless pride that made him who he was. "I didn't build you," he said. "I found you, broken, lost. I saved you." "Saved me," I repeated softly, the words bitter on my tongue. "Or remade me into what you wanted?" Something inside him cracked then, so quietly I almost missed it. A tremor in his voice, a softening in his posture, as though the weight of all the things he'd done was finally too much to hold. He took a step closer, and though every instinct in me screamed to retreat, I didn't. I couldn't. "I don't know how to let you go," he said, his voice trembling for the first time. "Every night since that explosion, I've dreamed of you. Not the death, not the fire, you. Laughing, smiling, lying beside me. Every morning I woke up wishing it was still real. And now you're here, breathing, standing in front of me, and I don't care what name you wear. I'd burn the world again to keep you." The words struck something deep inside me, a place that was both alive and aching, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, I reached up, my hand brushing against his cheek. His skin was warm beneath my palm, his stubble rough, real, grounding. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch like a man who had forgotten tenderness. "Dante," I whispered. But the rest of the sentence died on my lips, because he was looking at me again, and there was something in his gaze that made the air between us shatter. Something raw, pleading, and utterly unguarded. He reached for me then, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the side of my neck, tracing the line of my jaw, the way one might trace a memory they're terrified to lose. And when he kissed me, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, like he was trying to breathe life into something that had already died. His lips were warm, his hands unrelenting, and for one dizzying, terrifying moment I kissed him back. It was a collision, of pain, of longing, of two people who had both been burned by the same fire and still couldn't help reaching for the flames again. The kiss tasted of salt and sorrow, of years lost and names forgotten, and it made my chest ache in a way that was both unbearable and addictive. But then, just as suddenly, a flash cut through my mind. Not a memory, but something close. A moment. A man's hand gripping the back of my neck. The smell of gasoline. A whispered phrase in my ear. "Don't fail him, Arya." And then fire again, roaring, consuming everything. I pulled away with a gasp, stumbling back, my fingers touching my lips as though they might tell me something my mind couldn't. Dante froze, confusion and pain warring across his face. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice raw. I couldn't finish. The words tangled in my throat. I felt dizzy, unsteady, as if my body remembered something it shouldn't. Someone was there, I whispered finally. The night of the explosion. Someone told me not to fail you. His brow furrowed, his gaze darkening. Fail me? He repeated slowly. What does that mean? I don't know, I said, though the words sounded like a lie. It's all fragments, Dante. Pieces of something I can't put together. He took a step toward me, his voice low but steady. You're remembering, he said. It's starting. I don't want it to start, I said, the fear creeping into my voice now. I don't want to remember something that feels like a nightmare. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought I saw fear in his eyes too. Not for me, but for whatever truth might come crawling out of the dark when my memory finally surfaced. Outside, the thunder cracked louder, a violent echo of everything breaking inside me. I can't do this, I said, backing away, shaking my head. You want me to be her, but I'm not. I don't even know what she was to you, or what she did. He reached for me again, but this time I stepped out of reach. Arya, he said softly, his voice almost pleading now. Please don't run from me. I'm not running, I whispered. I'm just trying to remember what I'm running from. And before he could stop me, I turned and fled down the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the mansion like a heartbeat gone mad. I didn't stop until I reached the far end of the east wing, where the air smelled faintly of dust and smoke. There, behind an old tapestry, I found a locked door, one I'd never noticed before, though I couldn't have said why. Something about it called to me, pulling me closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The metal was cold against my palm, and as I pressed my ear to the door, I swore I heard something. Faint, distant, impossible, the sound of a woman's voice whispering my name. And though I didn't understand how, I knew that whatever was behind that door wasn't just a secret. It was the beginning of the truth. The truth I had died for once and might die for again. The door at the end of the east wing had a strange gravity to it, as if it didn't just exist within the house but beneath it, like a heartbeat sealed behind wood and iron, pulsing softly, waiting for someone to listen. I don't know how long I stood there that night, my hand pressed against the cold surface, feeling that faint thrum of energy that shouldn't have been there, that shouldn't have felt alive, and yet it did. The whisper I thought I'd heard, that soft, impossible voice calling my name, lingered in my head like a song I couldn't stop humming, though I couldn't tell if it had come from beyond the door or from somewhere deep within me, from that place where memory and madness had begun to blur into one indistinguishable ache. When I tried the handle, it didn't move, though I felt the faintest give, like it was locked more by will than by mechanism. I pressed my ear to the wood again, and though the house was silent, that suffocating silence that lived in every corner of this place, I could swear I heard breathing, slow and shallow, as though something or someone was on the other side, waiting. My own breath caught, and for a moment I was certain I would hear the sound of footsteps, Dante's footsteps, behind me, catching me in the act. But the hallway remained empty, and the only sound was the dull rhythm of my pulse. The following day unfolded like a strange dream, one of those dreams that looks normal from the outside but feels wrong when you move through it. Dante was distant, preoccupied, though his eyes lingered on me with the same haunted intensity as always, as if he was trying to memorize me before something inevitable slipped away. I wanted to ask him about the locked room, about the voice, about what else he might be hiding inside these marble walls that looked like luxury but smelled like secrecy. But every time I opened my mouth, his gaze silenced me. Instead, I went back to the library, the only place in the house that seemed to breathe with something other than sorrow. The hidden passage was still open, the small room behind it untouched since the night I found it, the photographs still scattered across the desk, like pieces of a broken mirror, reflecting fragments of a life I didn't fully remember living. I sat there for hours, studying the faces, the curves of the letters written on the backs of the pictures, the soft tilt of the smile that wasn't mine but looked exactly like me. One photo caught my attention, one I hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath the others. It was taken in a different setting, not one of the opulent rooms of the mansion but a warehouse or a dock, the background dim and cluttered with crates. In the image, I was standing beside a man I didn't recognize, though the sight of him sent a cold shiver down my spine. He was younger than Dante, with lighter hair and a sharp, calculating smile that didn't reach his eyes. My own expression in the picture was unreadable, composed, detached, like a mask. On the back, in the same looping handwriting I'd come to recognize as my own, were 3 words that made my stomach twist. He can't know. I didn't need to ask who he was. My hands trembled as I held the photo, and a flicker of memory ignited, bright and merciless. A room filled with smoke. A man's hand on my shoulder. A deal made in the dark. The sound of my own voice saying words that didn't sound like mine, cold, rehearsed, deadly. Then Dante's face, the way he'd looked at me the first time we met. Not with suspicion, but with trust. Trust I'd shattered before I ever earned it. The truth pressed against my chest like a blade. I hadn't just loved Dante once. I'd betrayed him. When he found me in the library later that evening, I was still holding the photograph, unable to hide the tremor in my fingers. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw it, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached, as though he were approaching an animal that might bolt. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice careful, measured, too calm to be harmless. "Here," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. It was buried under the others. He took the photo from me, his thumb brushing over the words written on the back. For a moment he didn't say anything, just stared at it, his jaw tightening, his knuckles whitening. "You shouldn't be looking at these," he said at last. "I think I should," I replied. "I think I need to." He looked at me then, not with the anger I expected, but with something far worse. Resignation. "You wouldn't understand," he said softly. "Not yet." "Then make me understand," I demanded, stepping closer. "Because I remember things, Dante. Flashes, voices, a man I don't recognize, and I think I was part of something. Something that involved you." His silence was confirmation enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost too soft to hear. "You were," he said, "but not the way you think." "Then tell me," I pressed, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Tell me what I did." He turned away, walking to the window, his reflection fractured by the rain streaking down the glass. "You were supposed to protect me," he said finally, his voice rough. "And for a while I believed you would. I believed every word you said, every touch, every promise, until I found out you were working for them, for the people who wanted me dead. You were their spy, Arya. You were the one they sent to destroy me." His words struck like lightning, quick, brutal, electrifying. My breath caught, the world tilting beneath me. "That's not possible," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. "It is," he said simply. "And you did." The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick, the sound of the rain outside roaring in my ears. I wanted to deny it, to scream that he was wrong, but the flashes in my head, the voices, the faces, the man with the sharp smile, all came rushing back, too real to ignore. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, though what I really wanted to ask was why he still looked at me like I was worth saving. "Because," he said, turning toward me again, his eyes burning with something I couldn't name. "When I found out, it was already too late. You'd fallen for me, and I'd fallen for you. and I didn't care anymore who you were or what you'd done. He stepped closer, his voice trembling, raw. The night you died, you were supposed to hand me over to them, but you didn't. You tried to warn me, you tried to run, they found out, and they made sure you wouldn't have the chance. I could feel tears burning at the edges of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the unbearable weight of too much truth. So that's why you brought me back, I said, the realization settling like poison in my chest. You wanted to fix what we ruined. No, he said softly. I wanted to believe that love could outlive betrayal. The storm outside grew louder, the thunder cracking like judgment. I looked at him then, really looked at him. At the man who had loved the woman who betrayed him. At the man who had rebuilt her from ashes because he couldn't bear to live without her ghost. And in his eyes I saw the impossible truth. He didn't just want me to remember. He wanted me to forgive him for remembering too. But forgiveness is a strange thing. It requires understanding, and understanding is a kind of death. Because now I knew what I had been. And what terrified me most was not that I had betrayed Dante once. It was that a part of me, the part waking up again, knew I would do it all over if I had to. I turned away before he could see it in my face, before he could read the truth in my eyes. But as I walked toward the door, I felt it again. That faint hum from the east wing, the locked room calling softly in the distance as though it too remembered everything I had done. And I knew then that whatever waited behind that door wasn't just a secret. It was proof. There are moments when the air itself seems to change, when you can almost feel the past sliding back into the present, like a ghost wearing skin again. And that's how it felt after Dante's confession, as if the world had shifted slightly, just enough to let the dead breathe again. The mansion no longer felt like a home, not even the illusion of one. It felt like a mausoleum, a place where every polished surface and gilded mirror reflected something that had already ended. I couldn't walk down a hallway without hearing whispers that may have been real, or may have been the echo of memories returning, each one threading itself back into the fabric of who I had once been. I barely saw Dante the next day, though I could sense him everywhere. His presence in the murmured voices of his men, his shadow in the corners of rooms, the faint trace of his cologne on the silk of the curtains. The tension in the house was almost tangible, like static before a storm, and everyone seemed to move more carefully, as though the wrong step might wake something dangerous. I felt it too. The awareness that the fragile truce between past and present couldn't hold much longer, that soon the truth would demand to be spoken in full, no matter the cost. By late afternoon, the storm broke. Not in the sky, but at the gates. I heard the sound first. The roar of engines, sharp and guttural, growing louder until it swallowed the steady rhythm of rain. I went to the window just in time to see a convoy of black cars pulling up the long drive, tires spitting gravel, headlights cutting through the fog. Dante's guards rushed to meet them, their guns drawn, their voices sharp and clipped through the wind. I didn't know what was happening, but I felt it. Something was wrong. Something big. And then I saw him. Dante himself stepping out from the shadows of the front entrance, his coat flaring in the wind, his hand already resting on the gun at his hip. His face was calm. Too calm. And it struck me then that this was who he truly was. Not the man who whispered in the dark. Not the lover who kissed me like a sinner begging absolution. But the warlord who could command fear like an art form. He walked toward the arriving cars with that same unhurried confidence, and when the doors opened, I caught sight of the men who stepped out. Strangers, but not to him. One of them stood taller than the rest, his hair pale, his suit immaculate even in the storm, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes but promised violence. Something deep inside me stirred. Recognition. I didn't know his name. But I knew that face. I'd seen it before, in that photograph I'd found in the hidden room, standing beside me. My heart slammed against my ribs, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was moving, running down the hallway, my bare feet silent against the cold marble. The house seemed to hold its breath as I passed, every shadow deepening, every sound muffled by anticipation. I reached the grand staircase and stopped at the top, just far enough to see without being seen. "Lucien," Dante said, his voice even but edged with warning. "You have some nerve showing up here." The pale-haired man, Lucien, laughed softly, the sound smooth and sharp all at once. "Come now, Dante," he said, spreading his hands like a preacher addressing a congregation. "Is that any way to greet an old friend?" "Friend?" Dante repeated, the word like poison. "You tried to kill me." Lucian's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I didn't try. I simply failed." "But then again," he said, tilting his head slightly, "so did you. You failed her." I froze. The air between them crackled, and I could feel the weight of their shared history pressing down on the space like gravity. Dante's jaw tightened, and I saw his hand twitch near his gun, but he didn't draw. "You don't get to say her name," Dante said, his voice quiet, controlled. Lucien's gaze flicked past him, toward the mansion, toward me. "Oh, but I think I do," he said softly. "After all, she was mine long before she was yours." My breath caught, a soundless gasp that echoed only inside me. For a moment, everything stilled. The rain, the wind, even the guards seemed frozen, waiting for what would happen next. Dante's expression darkened, the calm shattering into something dangerous. "You're lying," he said. Lucien smiled wider. "Am I? Do you really think Aria Bellini just fell into your world by accident? That she just happened to love the man she was sent to destroy?" His words hit me like a physical blow. My hand gripped the railing, knuckles white. Dante didn't move, but I saw it, the flash of pain in his eyes before it vanished behind rage. "You used her." Lucian's smile turned pitying. "No, Dante, we used her. You just didn't know it." Something inside me shattered then, a soundless cracking, like glass breaking behind my ribs. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that whatever I had done, whatever I had been, it hadn't been that. But the memories came faster now, jagged and merciless. Lucian's voice whispering plans in the dark, his hand on mine as he slid a gun across the table. My own voice saying the words, "I'll get close to him." It was all there, buried under the ashes, waiting. Lucian turned his gaze upward then, his eyes meeting mine across the distance. For a moment the world fell away. It was just us, and the look in his eyes was not surprise but triumph. "Ah," he said softly, "so the dead really do rise." Dante followed his gaze, and when he saw me, something broke in his face. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, cutting grief that looked worse. "Get inside," he said sharply, his voice like steel, but I couldn't move. "Dante, inside!" The shout jolted me, but before I could take a step, Lucian's voice cut through the storm again, cold and cruel and intimate. "She remembers me," he said. "Don't you, Aria?" The sound of my name from his lips. My name, not Elena, not the lie Dante had wrapped me in, made something inside me twist. I didn't answer, couldn't. Dante drew his gun then, the click loud even through the rain. "You're done talking," he said. Lucien only smiled. "You can't kill what you already buried." He turned then, signaling to his men, and in an instant, gunfire erupted again, the chaos of it consuming the courtyard, the flashes of light, the scream of metal, the acrid scent of smoke filling the air. Dante's men returned fire, the thunder of bullets merging with the real thunder above, and I dropped to the floor, covering my head as glass shattered around me. When it was over, the silence was unbearable. I crawled to the edge of the staircase and looked down. The cars were gone, the gates left open. Dante stood in the rain, his gun hanging limp at his side, his shirt soaked and clinging to his skin, his face unreadable. Slowly he looked up at me. His eyes, those dark, unflinching eyes, met mine, and in them I saw everything: the love, the betrayal, the loss, the realization that the woman he'd resurrected was the same one who'd once brought him to his knees. "Tell me," he said, his voice low, raw, breaking. "Tell me it's not true." But I couldn't. Because the truth was crawling back now, piece by piece, clawing its way out of the grave he'd built for me. Lucian had been my handler. Dante had been my target. And love had been the mistake that ruined us all. I turned away, the taste of rain and ash on my tongue, knowing that the past I'd buried had finally come home. And somewhere beyond the storm, I swore I could still hear Lucian's voice, low and amused, whispering the words that made my blood run cold. "The dead don't return, Arya. They come to finish what they started." The night after Lucian returned felt like the end of something unnamed. Not just of peace or safety, but of the fragile illusion that I was living a life borrowed from someone else. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and rain-soaked earth, and the mansion itself seemed to groan under the weight of what had happened. The walls, the mirrors, even the marble floors seemed to absorb the tension between Dante and me, holding it like breath that refused to be released. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucien's face again. That calm, knowing smile, the way he had said my name as if he had carved it himself, as if it belonged more to him than to me. When dawn came, the light was dim and cold, bleeding through the heavy curtains in pale streaks that reminded me of scars. I sat by the window, staring out over the courtyard where blood still stained the stones near the gate, faint but visible. Dante hadn't come to me since the confrontation. I'd heard his voice through the walls, low and furious, barking orders to his men, the language of vengeance spoken fluently and without hesitation. I imagined him pacing his office, glass in hand, every thought turning toward war. Yet beneath that anger, I knew there was something else festering, something quieter, deeper, more dangerous. When the door finally opened, I didn't have to turn to know it was him. His presence filled a room long before his body did. That gravity he carried, that scent of leather and smoke and danger that seemed to follow him everywhere. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing, and the silence between us stretched thin, taut as a wire. I wanted him to speak first, to demand answers, to shout, anything. But he didn't. Instead, he walked toward me slowly, his movements deliberate, as if every step was a decision. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said finally, his voice low and rough, and though it wasn't a shout, it carried more weight than any scream. I turned toward him, meeting his gaze, though my pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. "Because I didn't remember," I said, and even as I said it, the words felt hollow. "Not until now." He laughed, softly, bitterly, and the sound hurt more than any accusation could have. "You remember now, don't you?" he said. "All of it. Him. What you did. What you were." The air between us seemed to crackle, every word sparking against something that had been waiting to ignite. "Yes," I whispered, because there was no use denying it anymore. "I remember." He closed the distance between us in an instant, his hands gripping the arms of the chair I sat in, his face inches from mine. His eyes, those dark, beautiful, terrible eyes, searched my face like he was trying to find the lie hidden under my skin. Then tell me, he said, his breath warm against my lips. Tell me what it was. Tell me what you did. My throat felt tight, my voice trembling when it came. I was sent to watch you, I said slowly. To learn you, to find your weaknesses and deliver them to Lucian. I was supposed to be the weapon that ended you. He flinched, just barely, but enough for me to see it. And you did it, he said, though the words came out more like a question. I tried, I said, my voice breaking. At first I thought I could. That's what I was trained to do. You were just a name, a target, a ghost wearing a crown made of blood. But then I stopped, the rest of the sentence catching in my throat. He leaned closer, his voice trembling with fury and disbelief. Then you what? I fell in love with you, I said, the words tumbling out like a confession that had been waiting years to escape. And everything after that stopped making sense. For a moment he said nothing. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, his breathing uneven. I could see the war waging behind his eyes, love and hate colliding in silence. You think that makes it better? He said finally, his voice quieter now but sharper, each word deliberate. You think loving me erases the blood you spilled, the lies you told, the knife you pressed to my throat while whispering my name like it meant something? Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. No, I said. It doesn't make it better. It just makes it worse. Because I meant every lie I told, and I hated myself for it. I wanted to stop, but it was too late. You were already inside me, under my skin, in my pulse, in everything. And when they told me to kill you, I couldn't. So I ran. I ran because it was the only thing I could do that still felt like mine. His hands clenched on the chair, and for a heartbeat I thought he might strike me. Not out of cruelty, but out of pain, the kind that needed somewhere to go. But instead he straightened, turning away, his hands shaking as he dragged them through his hair. You should have let me die, he said, his voice breaking on the last word. You should have finished it. I tried to save you, I said, standing now, my voice trembling. That night, the explosion, it wasn't meant for me, it was meant for you. I knew what Lucian planned and I went instead. I thought I could stop it, but I was wrong. I died trying to protect the man I was sent to destroy. He turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger. It was disbelief, grief, maybe even guilt. You're saying you died for me, he said slowly. I'm saying I didn't mean to, I replied. But yes, I did. The silence that followed was unbearable. The sound of rain had returned, soft against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the space between words. He walked to the window, staring out into the gray morning, his reflection fractured in the glass. I wanted to hate you, he said after a long moment, his voice quiet, fragile. After you died, I tried to. I told myself it was easier that way. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw you. The way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching. The way you said my name like you already knew it would ruin you. I thought love had made me weak. But now I think it made me blind. He turned toward me again, his expression raw. You knew who I was, Arya. You knew what I'd done, what kind of man I am, and still you loved me. Why? I swallowed hard, my voice a whisper. Because even monsters deserve to be seen. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. And what about you? He asked softly. What does a woman like you deserve? I smiled then, not out of joy, but out of something darker, sadder. To remember, I said. To finally remember everything, even if it kills me again. He stood there for a long time, just watching me. And in that silence, I realized that whatever existed between us now was no longer love. At least, not the kind that saves. It was something older, something that lived where love and ruin meet, something that refused to die even after everything else had burned. When he finally moved, it wasn't to touch me, but to pour a drink, his hand steady now. "Lucian won't stop," he said. "He's not done with you. He thinks you still owe him something. And if he's right, then he's already planning to use you again." "I won't let him," I said, though my voice shook. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not softness, not love, but something colder, a kind of resolve that terrified me. "You don't have a choice," he said quietly. "You're still part of this, whether you want to be or not. You always were." I took a step closer, reaching for his arm, but he didn't move, didn't flinch. "Then what happens now?" I asked. He met my gaze, and the answer that came wasn't a promise. It was a sentence. "Now," he said, "we finish what you started." The rain fell harder then, and outside, I thought I saw the faint flash of headlights through the fog, like ghosts arriving late to a funeral. And in that moment, I knew that whatever was coming next would not be redemption. It would be reckoning. It's strange how quiet the world becomes when you know that everything you've tried to bury is finally clawing its way back to the surface. The silence isn't peaceful. It's suffocating, like the calm that lingers right before an executioner's blade falls. That was how it felt in Dante's mansion after our last conversation. The air too still, the walls too attentive, the corridors too narrow, as though the house itself understood what was coming and didn't want to watch. I could feel something building beneath my skin, not quite fear, but the kind of dread that comes from certainty. The knowledge that whatever future I had left was bound to detonate, just as the car had years ago. Only this time, it wouldn't be fire that consumed me, but truth. I spent the day wandering the house like a ghost haunting her own life, tracing the same steps I had walked when I first arrived. The staircase where Dante's voice had once sounded like salvation. The library where I had found the photos. The east wing where the locked door still waited. Patient and silent. Every time I passed it, I felt it there, watching me, breathing with me, humming softly like a vein under skin. I thought about opening it, about tearing it off its hinges just to see what secret it was keeping. But some part of me, the part that had learned to listen to instinct, told me to wait. Some doors, I thought, open themselves when the time is right. By nightfall, Dante had still not returned from whatever revenge-fueled errand had pulled him into the city. I stood at the window of my room, staring out at the lights that flickered far beyond the gates, the rain streaking down the glass in long, trembling lines. Somewhere out there, Lucien was waiting. Watching, plotting, smiling that same cold, unshakable smile. I could feel him like a shadow moving beneath my thoughts, whispering the same words he always used to when I worked for him. "Loyalty is a choice, Arya. You can break a heart, but never a promise." And the terrible thing was, I didn't know which one I had broken. When the phone rang, the sound was so sudden that it felt like a physical shock. The mansion's landline, old and heavy, sat on the table near the bed. I hesitated before answering, because deep down I already knew who it would be. "Hello," I said, though my voice trembled. For a moment there was only silence. Then came the voice, low, smooth, familiar enough to make my knees weaken. "Arya," Lucian said. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to pick up the phone." Every syllable was deliberate, polished like a blade. I gripped the receiver tighter. "What do you want?" He laughed softly, and the sound slid under my skin. "What I've always wanted," he said. "You. The real you. The one Dante tried to bury beneath his fantasies of redemption." "I'm not yours," I said, though the words didn't sound convincing even to me. "Oh, but you were," he murmured. "You belonged to me long before you ever belonged to him. I made you what you are. You remember, don't you? The nights we planned, the things we built together. You weren't just my spy, Arya. You were my masterpiece. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. You used me, I said. You turned me into a weapon. No, he said simply. I revealed what you already were. The rain beat harder against the glass, a steady rhythm like a countdown. Why are you calling? I asked, my voice shaking now. Because you're running out of time, he said, his tone suddenly sharp, cutting through the softness like a knife. Dante's men found something tonight. Evidence. Proof of what you were before. They'll bring it to him soon, and when they do, he won't look at you the same way again. He'll remember who you are, and then he'll do what he should have done years ago. My breath hitched. You're lying, he chuckled. I don't lie to you. I never needed to. You'll see, Arya. When he comes back, ask him about the file they found. Ask him what's hidden behind that locked door you keep circling like a moth around flame. He's been keeping it from you. The last piece of what you were. You think he saved you, but he only rebuilt what he couldn't forgive. You'll understand soon enough. Lucienne, I began, but he interrupted me, his voice softening to a whisper that felt almost intimate. Do you remember what I told you before you left me for him? He asked. I closed my eyes and the memory came unbidden. The warehouse, the gun in my hand, his lips at my ear. If you ever betray me, Arya, remember this. The only way to be free of me is to die. I opened my mouth to speak, but the line went dead. For a long moment I just stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the silence ringing louder than any sound. Then, almost without thinking, I turned and walked toward the east wing. My steps were fast, almost frantic, my breath shallow. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the sconces, the light trembling with each gust of wind that pressed against the windows. When I reached the locked door, I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the heavy brass keyring I'd stolen from Dante's study earlier that week and tried them one by one until I heard the click. A small, sharp sound that might as well have been a gunshot. The door creaked open slowly, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. Something faintly metallic, old and clean, like rust washed away by rain. The room was small, windowless, lit only by a single hanging bulb that flickered overhead. Papers covered the desk, photographs pinned to the walls. At the center of it all sat a single thick folder labeled in Dante's handwriting, AR, confidential. My initials. Hands trembling, I opened it. Inside were pages of reports, documents stamped with government insignias, surveillance photos, of me before the explosion. I was dressed differently in each one, sometimes glamorous and disarming, other times invisible, blending into crowds, my expression cold and unreadable. There were transcripts, too, my voice recorded, instructing others, issuing orders, planning hits, manipulating deals. Every page was proof that I hadn't just been a pawn, I'd been a player. I had been everything Dante despised, but what broke me wasn't the evidence of who I had been. It was the last page, the one paper clipped to the back. A death certificate. Arya Bellini, cause of death, explosion, issued by order of Dante Morelli. My breath left me in one long, trembling exhale. He hadn't just buried me metaphorically. He had made it official. He had declared me dead to the world, his final act of control, his attempt to rewrite history so that the woman who betrayed him could no longer exist. I didn't hear him come in until his reflection appeared in the glass case beside me. Now you know, Dante said quietly. I turned, the file still clutched in my hands, my voice breaking. You did this, I said. You erased me. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and heavy with everything unsaid. You left me no choice, he said. You were gone. There was nothing left to save. Nothing left to save, I repeated, my voice rising. Or nothing left to control. He flinched, just slightly, but didn't look away. "I tried to protect you," he said. "Even after what you did, even after you burned everything. I thought if I could bring you back, I could change the ending." "And what ending is that, Dante?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "The one where you save me, or the one where you finally kill me for good?" His jaw tightened, his voice lowering. "The one where you stop lying. To me, to yourself." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the space between us charged with every sin we'd ever shared. And then the lights flickered, the sound of engines outside breaking through the silence. Dante turned toward the window, his instincts sharp and immediate. "They found us," he said. "Lucien's men." I dropped the file, the papers scattering across the floor like white feathers soaked in blood. He grabbed his gun and turned to me. "You're staying here." "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I started this, Dante. I'll finish it." He hesitated, a heartbeat too long. And that was when the glass shattered, bullets ripping through the windows, slicing the air like rain made of steel. Dante moved instantly, shoving me to the floor, his body covering mine again like it had that first night. The world erupted into noise, gunfire, shouts, the splintering of wood. Somewhere beyond the chaos, I heard Lucien's voice, calm and clear through the storm. "Come out, Arya," he called. "Let's finish what we started." Dante fired back, his breath harsh, his body tense. He looked down at me, his voice breaking with urgency. "If they take you, they'll destroy you. You understand? They'll turn you into what you were again." And then, impossibly, horrifyingly, the door to the east wing burst open, and Lucien himself stepped into the light, his gun raised, his eyes locked on mine. "Too late," he said softly. "She already is." Dante fired. The world went white. When I woke, the world was quiet in the way that only follows ruin. That heavy, endless silence that feels almost sacred. Like the air after thunder has spent itself. For a long moment. I didn't know if I was alive or dead, if I had crossed back into that place I'd once escaped, or if I was still caught in the moment before everything broke. The light that filtered through the smoke was soft and golden, dust spinning in the air like ash that had forgotten to fall, and I could taste the faint metallic sting of blood at the back of my throat. My ears were ringing, my body aching, but I was breathing. And that was enough to tell me that fate had once again chosen cruelty over mercy. When my eyes finally focused, I saw Dante first. Sprawled across the floor beside me, his body half shielding mine, his shirt torn, blood darkening the fabric near his shoulder. He was still breathing, shallow but steady, his face turned toward me, eyes half open, unfocused yet searching, as if even unconscious he refused to stop protecting me. The room around us was chaos, shattered glass, bullet holes carved into the walls, the scent of gunpowder thick in the air. Outside, the storm had finally stopped, leaving only the hollow echo of rainwater dripping through the cracks. Lucien was gone. For a brief, desperate moment, I thought he might be dead, that perhaps Dante's final shot had found him. But then I saw the trail of blood leading out through the door and into the hall, fading into the shadows like the end of a promise. I pushed myself up slowly, every muscle trembling, and crawled toward Dante, my hands shaking as I touched his face. He stirred, his breath catching, a low groan escaping him. "Dante," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're alive." He blinked, his eyes finding mine, his voice hoarse and frayed. "So are you," he said, and though it should have sounded like relief, it came out like disbelief. I helped him sit up, his weight heavy against me, his warmth seeping through the blood and dirt and smoke between us. "He's gone," I said, though even as I spoke it, I knew it wasn't true. Men like Lucien didn't die quietly. They waited, healed, and came back sharper. Dante followed my gaze toward the open door, his expression grim. "Then it isn't over," he said. And I could hear the steel in his voice, that familiar resolve that had once made me love him and fear him in equal measure. But something inside me shifted then. Not fear, not anger, but exhaustion, deep and absolute. It has to be, I said softly. If it doesn't end now, it never will. Not for either of us. He turned to look at me, and I could see the war behind his eyes. Love and rage and guilt colliding in ways that had no clean edges. You don't understand, he said. Lucian won't stop until he has you again. Then let him come, I said, standing slowly, my balance unsteady but my voice firm. Let him see what's left of the woman he made. I'm not his anymore, and I'm not yours either. I can't belong to the ghosts that built me. He rose too, wincing, but didn't reach for me, this time. And what are you going to do? He asked, his tone sharp but not cruel. Run again. You can't outrun what you are, Arya. I smiled then, small and bitter. Maybe not, I said, but I can choose what I become. He said nothing, only watched as I crossed the room, my hand brushing against the wall where the folder had fallen, papers scattered across the floor, like fragments of a past that had finally been exhumed. I picked up one photograph, the one of me standing beside Lucian, our faces blurred by time and intent, and I stared at it for a long moment before tearing it in half. The sound was quiet, but it felt like the loudest thing I had ever done. When I looked back at Dante, he was leaning against the wall, his breathing shallow, his expression softer now, though the exhaustion etched deep into his face made him look older, more human than I had ever seen him. You think it's that easy? He said, his voice low. To walk away from this life, from everything we've done? No, I said simply, but I think it's harder to keep staying dead. Something flickered in his eyes, something between pain and admiration. And for a moment I saw the man he had been before the blood, before the Empire, before I became the weapon meant to destroy him. You sound like her, he said quietly. I am her, I replied, just not the version either of you wanted. The sound of footsteps echoed then, faint, uneven, coming from the hall. Dante stiffened, drawing his gun again, but I placed my hand over his. No, I said. He's mine. Lucian appeared in the doorway a moment later, his suit torn, his face streaked with blood, but that same infuriating smile still on his lips. There you are, he said softly, as if we were lovers meeting after a long separation. The survivor. I stepped forward before Dante could move. You should have stayed gone, I said, and my voice didn't tremble. He tilted his head, his gaze sliding between the two of us. You think you can kill me? He asked, almost gently. You couldn't even kill the part of yourself that belongs to me. You're right, I said. I couldn't. But she's already dead. You killed her the moment you made her choose between love and loyalty. He smiled again, but there was something hollow behind it now. And what are you without her? Free, I said. Before he could answer, I fired. The sound filled the room, sharp and final. He stumbled back, the shock flickering across his face like disbelief, then fell. The silence that followed was complete, heavy, unyielding, and absolute. I lowered the gun slowly, my hand shaking, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. Dante didn't move toward me, didn't say a word. He just stood there, his eyes on me, something like sorrow softening the hard lines of his face. It's over, I whispered, though it felt more like a prayer than a statement. He stepped closer, his voice quiet. No, Arya, he said. It's never really over for people like us. I turned toward him, tears finally breaking free, streaking through the soot and blood on my face. Then maybe it's time it was, I said. Maybe it's time we let it be. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached out, his hand trembling as it brushed against my cheek, a touch that felt like both forgiveness and farewell. "You always were the fire," he said softly. "I just kept pretending I could survive you." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of that touch linger one last time before stepping back. "Goodbye, Dante," I said, and for the first time I meant it. Not as an ending, but as a release. When I left the mansion, the morning had begun to break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray, the kind of light that looks like it's been earned. The air smelled of rain and smoke and something faintly sweet, like the world was trying to cleanse itself. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The house behind me belonged to ghosts now. His, mine, ours. As I walked down the long drive, each step felt lighter, though the ache in my chest remained, an old wound that would never fully heal but no longer owned me. The past would follow, of course. It always does. But I had learned something in the wreckage. That survival isn't about outrunning the fire. It's about learning how to live with the burn. And as the sun rose higher, its light catching the edges of the smoke still curling into the air behind me, I thought, perhaps for the first time, that maybe dying once had been the easiest part. Living again would be the real rebellion.